In this section, we're going to discuss pollution assimilation. So what happens with the pollutants when it enters a water body? And on the slide here, on the cover, I've got a picture of Lake Washington. That's the city of Seattle in the background. And with respect to the city of Seattle, they take a lot of pride in this lake now. This lake, Lake Washington, has an interesting history that really warrants our further discovery. So Lake Washington, it was a lake that had sewage effluents going into it. And after diversion of sewage effluent, the winter concentrations of phosphate and nitrate decreased faster for phosphorus than it did for the nitrates. And this was published by W.T. Edmondson in 1970 in the very prestigious Journal of Science, one of the best journals in the world. Of all the things they could be publishing on, they're discussing diverting sewage from Lake Washington into Puget Sound and how the lake started to respond. So, interesting article. We're going to discuss it a little bit further here on the next slide. So here is the city of Seattle. This is the Pacific Northwest up here. You got Washington here. We've got Canada up here. Vancouver is just right there. And in the center of this map here, we've got Puget Sound. Flows out to the ocean, and then right to the right of it is Lake Washington. So here's Puget Sound, here's Lake Washington. Lake Washington was receiving the treated effluent from at least a few wastewater plants, and the lake was starting to undergo eutrophication. It was a mesotrophic lake, and as the lake was changing, there was an interest in getting the sewage out of there and seeing what effect it may have. Now, I tell you this story because it's a landmark case study in terms of how sewage effluent, even when treated, can impact water quality. And here's the guy, Tommy Edmondson, who did the paper, and he was, a student of G.E. Hutchinson, who this guy here, almost all people who study ecology, limnology being the study of freshwater systems like lakes and rivers, but also all kinds of other areas. Fire ecology, forest ecology, a lot of the basic sciences and environmental health. A lot of us trace our roots back to this guy here, G.E. Hutchinson. And Edmondson was one of his graduates, so he came from Cambridge to Yale. These guys were at Yale. H.T. Odom trained Dr. Mitch. Dr. Mitch trained Reeder. These guys still work with me. I was heavily influenced by both of them, so you guys are getting it. Sorry about the lack of gender diversity with these guys. It was a product of the times. These guys have done a lot better. With that said, what did this paper from Emery, Moon, and Welch in 1973 have to say about Lake Washington? So Lake Washington had the diversion of secondary treated effluent going on. All right, that started in 1963. It went on to 1967. In the years leading up to it, the lake had many symptoms, so they used the terminology symptoms like it's, an illness of a lake entering eutrophic condition. So the lake was a mesotrophic lake, and it was starting to show elevated levels of phosphorus during the winter months. Total phosphorus in the fall, winter, and spring was 61 parts per billion. Total phosphorus levels in Lake Washington before diversion remained relatively high. High levels averaging 65 micrograms total phosphorus were sustained through those winter months. The maximum surface level was 80 micrograms per liter. This is with respect to total phosphorus. Nitrate was 323 micrograms per liter with a surface maximum of 480. Now you can compare those with Lake Reba or Wilgreen lakes, and you'll see that these lakes are still, despite their woes, are still better with respect to nutrients than what we may see. But this is secondarily treated effluent. So it's not raw sewage, it's treated sewage. And even in the 1960s, treated sewage still had a lot of phosphorus in it, so it had a lot of nitrates in it. It wasn't presumably pathogenic, but there was still a lot of nutrients. Now, we don't discharge to lakes anymore, and that paper was one of the major reasons. At least we don't discharge to big lakes or to little lakes anymore, or moderate-sized lakes. So the Great Lakes, they may still withstand some pollution entering them. But overall, streams and rivers tend to respond better to pollution than lakes as they are flowing. Streams and rivers are called lotic. Lakes are called lentic. Lentic meaning like soft waters. Streams and rivers are rougher waters, lotic. They respond better to pollution because they are flowing. Okay? Lakes are not flowing. In a lake system, things can get trapped. In streams and rivers, they can go downstream. And in a stream or river, we can have the dissolved oxygen levels get replenished through reaeration. So streams and rivers that have riffles and moving water will have more turbulence and more velocity, and that increases DO even better than photosynthesis, and you don't have to deal with the riffles respiring at night. Whereas with algae, although they may boost photosynthesis during the day, at night their cellular respiration continues with no oxygen. So riffles don't care about respiration or photosynthesis. They're constantly doing their thing. So there's no DO demand at night. And streams and rivers in some cases have more shading in their headwaters than you might see around lakes. Lakes out in the open water do not have shading. So shading decreases dissolved oxygen demand and decreases water temperature. So if you decrease water temperature, cooler water can hold more oxygen. Okay, so shading allows the water to hold more oxygen. And it also prevents the growth of all these algae that might at night suck the oxygen out of the water. So during the daytime, you might see in a lake lots of oxygen, but at night the demand might be very great. So it's just a little bit about why we choose to put our wastewater, treated wastewater, into streams and rivers compared to lakes. So we're going to pause this video here for some review